Imagine at 13 years old, you make a post online saying you want to make a few friends, and with those friends, you want to make music with. And that turns into one of the most influential boy bands of all time. That's the story of Brockhampton. What's up? I'm Seyr, and welcome to my corner of the internet. And on this episode, we're going to be discussing Brockhampton, specifically the Saturation trilogy of Brockhampton. But before we get to that, I need to give you a little context on who Brockhampton is or was at the time. So it's 2009, and a 13-year-old Kevin Abstract living in San Marcos, Texas, decides to make a post. He says he wants to make a few friends and he wants to make music with those friends. And that's how Alive Since Forever was born. With over 40 members, or approximately 40 members rather. This time in the Brockhampton law is not really that documented. They only released one EP at that time in 2013, and then the next year they disbanded basically because Kevin wasn't really feeling it, I guess. While he's still in San Marco, he basically picks a few members from Alive Since Forever, which basically make up the 15 members of Brockhampton, which were the frontmen: Kevin Abstract, Don McLennan, Joba, Melon Wood, Bareface, Matt Champion, and Amir Van. And in the production and management side, it's Kiko Merli, who is a producer, Romil Hamnani, also a producer, Henok HK Sileshi, also one of my favorite members that wasn't a frontman. He was more on the design front. I think creative designing. He was in charge of the cover arts for Brockhampton. John Nunes, who was effectively the band's manager for its entire run up until it disbanded. Better Onteniant. If you're a fan of Brockhampton, you quite possibly know the Mia Roberto line. So I don't think I really need to. But he was also one of the web designers for Brockhampton. Jabari Manuel, one of the producers, and Ashley Gray. I'm not really that sure on, but I do know he was also in the creative direction part, I think. I'm not sure. So with all of these members now in place for Brockhampton, they decide to make a mixtape as sort of like a test run to see how they can work together, basically. And the mixtape All American Trash was born, released March 30th, 2016. It wasn't really that crazy. I mean, I've heard it once, and it's okay. It was also the starting point that they needed. And after releasing All American Trash, they decided to move to Los Angeles, South Central. And that's when they decide to work on their album. So it's now 2017 and the band has relocated to Los Angeles and they want to start working on their debut album. These crazy motherfuckers decide to announce their album without having done a single thing towards making the album. This was on May 3rd, so they announced Saturation 1. At the time, it was just Saturation because it wasn't part of a trilogy. I mean, they didn't even have the album in hand to announce it. So they decided to go work on the album and gear it for release on the next month in June. By the next week, they're ready to show us the first single from the album, titled Face, which honestly is probably my favorite my favorite song on the album. When I got the first Saturation, it was already out and finished, so I didn't really get to see the rollout of the whole thing. But for me, Face is a favorite. It's a favorite. It's a dope song. The music video is in black and white, and I think they made it at the home that they were staying in, if I'm not mistaken. The next week comes around, and they drop Heat, another single from the album, and they follow Heat up with Gold and Star, and all of these songs have music videos accompanying them, all directed by Kevin. So this means the entire month of May was essentially their rollout, with a single dropping every single week. By the next month, in June, they have Saturation ready. On June 9th, 2017, Brockhampton releases its debut album, Saturation. It's an incredible album, to say the least, and our critics agree. It received critical acclaim, but at the time, Brockhampton wasn't Brockhampton, so they didn't really have the numbers to boost them up, basically. Saturation, for me personally, is, I wouldn't say the best of the three. I'd say for me, the best of the three is Saturation 2. That might also be for the mere fact that that's when I got introduced to Brockhampton, so that was my first album that I heard from them. But yeah, Saturation, 17 tracks, with 16 of the 17 tracks having 4 letters, with the last one having 5 letters, which is kind of a tying theme in between all 3 of these albums. So yeah, Saturation drops, and the little fan base that they have goes crazy. I mean, it's an incredible album, so it makes sense. And then the idea of forming a trilogy, a musical trilogy, forms in between the group. So they decide to announce Saturation 2. But before that, they move again from South Central to North Hollywood. This time deciding to focus on their sophomore album, Saturation 2, slated for release in August. So on August 1st, they decide to release the first single from Saturation 2, Gummy. And then the next week, August 8th, they decide to release a second single titled Swamp. And this goes on until the album is released, basically. And the album drops on August 25th, 2 months after their debut. And yeah, for me, Saturation 2, I don't think I really have like words to describe how incredible Saturation 2 is. And it sort of follows the thematic line, I guess, of with the first Saturation. The first 16 tracks had 4-letter words, with the last one having 5, and thus Saturation follows in that, with all of the track list except the last track having 5-letter words, with the last one having 6-letter words. This will lead us into Saturation. And so by now, they have a sizable fan base, enough for them to do a tour. So they announce their first tour, Jennifer's Tour, in support of both Saturation 1 and 2. So the tour happens, and I mean, it's a tour. And if it's a tour for favorite artists, you're gonna have a good time. But at this time, they're still playing in smaller venues. Until November 23rd, when they decide to announce their Saturation box set with Saturation 1, 2, and a third unnamed album. Saturation box set, which was supposed to be a combination of their first 3 albums. Yet, they're still on album 2. So, which leads us into December 1st, when they announced Saturation 3, slated for release December 15th. Mind you, this is just 6 months, and they're on the 3rd album. The first album was in June, and the 3rd album is in December of the very same year. And I guess to kind of bring like, attention to the album, they market it as their final album. And I mean, fans are like, what? How are you already on your final album? You just got here. But it's later clarified when they announced their 4th album, Team Effort, which would later be cancelled, and then it turned into Puppy, and then Puppy turned into Iridescence after a whole ass other thing happened, which we'll get to when we get to part 2 of this video. This one is mainly focused on the Saturation trilogy. So this time around, instead of dropping the single weeks beforehand, they dropped their first single from Saturation 3, Boogie, December 12th, 3 days before the album is supposed to come out. And Boogie is Boogie.
Once boy bands is One Direction, making niggas itch like a skin infection.
This is incredible. Boogie is quite possibly their first hit for me. And yeah, it was, I think, the first time I got to see Brockhampton being, because on the chorus, Kevin sings, "I've been beat up my whole life, I've been shut down, kicked down twice." So essentially it's them not giving a fuck anymore about people's thoughts, maybe, or their opinions. 2 days after Boogie comes out, they drop their second single from Saturation 3, Stains. And the very next day, Saturation 3 is in all of our libraries and all jamming. And probably, if I'm being honest, Saturation 3 might be the best one of the trilogy. Because it finds them cocky, it finds them not giving a fuck, like I said. It finds them essentially embracing who they are, and they sort of make fun of themselves that the subject matter has been the same for specific members. The subject matter has been the same in all 3 albums. And also in promotion of Saturation 3, they release a self-funded, self-made feature-length film directed by Kevin. Kevin, I think, has directed a lot, if not most, of the videos of Brockhampton, even after they got signed. I'm pretty sure, yeah, he directed a lot of videos. And I think the film follows a character called Helmet Boy, if I recall correctly. And it was, I guess you could say, his way of coming out, although I think he was already out by that time. And Saturation is a hit. I think it was the first album of theirs to get, no, I'm lying, it was the second. Saturation 2 also charted, but Saturation 3 was their highest point. But Saturation 3 was their highest point at this time, peaking at debuting at number 15 on the Billboard 200. And it began an incredible run. It also began some bittersweet moments, if you know what happened afterwards. And yeah, I guess that's it. Although the Saturation trilogy is impeccable, incredible, and for the mere fact that it was done by basically a couple of kids who were new, literally all of them were new to the industry. They knew nothing of anything that happens in the industry. They moved from Texas to Los Angeles to fulfill their dreams. And yeah, Brockhampton became Brockhampton. January 2018 rolls around and they begin their second tour in support of the entire trilogy. The tour is called Love Your Parents. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, not being American sometimes hurts, because these artists do tours and shows, and then they just yeet past Africa, the entire part of Africa, which I get for Brockhampton because they weren't that big also in America. But even bigger artists, they need specific events to come here. So what did we learn in this video? I say I learned, go after your dreams, go after what you're passionate about, go after what you want. I mean, Brockhampton did it to the point that now almost every member that was in the front of the group has dropped their own solo projects. Because Matt Champion dropped Maker's Laundry. Was it this year or last year? I can't remember properly, and then Dom also dropped an EP and an album. Kevin has been dropping solo projects even while Brockhampton was still active. And then Merlin got back with Amir to make a tape. And yeah, I mean, they got to do whatever the fuck they wanted, essentially, afterwards. Which is kind of a dope feeling. Thank you for joining me on this journey to what was essentially the greatest trilogy, musical trilogy in my lifetime, let me say. The greatest music trilogy. Like, it was, I remember Saturation, a point in my life where Saturation, the trilogy, was so influential and so powerful, man. I mean, I remember when they announced Amir's departure from the group, I was it didn't really sit well with me, but I get why they did it. I mean, it makes sense, all of those accusations and all that. But yeah, I think it's also kind of the reason why I started this channel. But thank you for joining me on my corner. This has been the Saturation Trilogy by Brockhampton. We'll do a part two probably. I'm not sure when, but because I have like a lot of episodes lined up. But yeah, we'll do a part two, essentially continuing the story of Brockhampton post the Saturation Trilogy. But yeah, until then, peace.